I want to welcome everyone to the Sunday morning session. My name is Bruce Woodeman. I'm the State Director for the Mutual UFO Network here in Missouri. I want to also welcome everyone who hasn't been here yesterday. We have a treat today. We have one of the world's foremost authorities on physical landing trace cases. Actually, in most people's minds, he may be the authority. Ted, why don't you come up here?
Well, I see a lot of very familiar faces out there, and I think, I can't remember that far back, but I think I did the first MUFON conference, and the big difference now, of course, is you can't look out the window and see dinosaurs roaming. So we've made some progress. We've eliminated the dinosaurs. A lot of things are going on, and thank goodness good things. And I've been at this, at the UFO investigation thing for about 35 years. At the suggestion of J. Allen Hynek in '68, I started specializing in the physical trace cases, cases where objects land or nearly land and leave behind some sort of physical residue. God love him, in 1968, Hynek was able to foresee the importance of this kind of case. And God love him, I was the guy that he kind of handed it to. And at this point in time, for the first time in 35 years, I actually have funding. And in the 20 years that Alan and I worked together, we managed to get one $4,000 grant. And even in the 70s, $4,000 wouldn't get you to a lot of landing sites. And when you got to those landing sites, you couldn't pay for any analysis. So I have to look back at all these terrific cases, very excellent high-quality cases, with little or no analysis. And of course, over the time, over this time span, the material's been lost, it's been thrown away, everything else. And so we have such an abundance. Well, Alan used to call it the embarrassment of riches. And we do have an embarrassing amount of evidence for UFOs that has been ignored by the scientific community. And we went to the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, we went to the United Nations, we went to NASA, we tried everywhere that we could to just get these people to consider the possibility that some of this residue was significant. And of course it's the old, don't bother me, my mind's made up mentality. And so we had all this good stuff slip through our fingers. And at this point in time, we are actually in a position to work with this stuff and perhaps get some answers. It's always fun for me to hear the skeptics say, all of these years, where's the evidence? And the only thing I can answer to that is, how many men would we have put on the moon with no funding? And that's exactly where we've been through this whole business. I've gone to, I couldn't guess how many universities and laboratories hand peddling samples and getting the promise of a geochemist or whatever, you know, yeah, boy, we'll get right on this. And after many phone calls, a couple of trips, nothing is ever done. And you go back and what do they say? Well, we're trying to figure out what tests need to be done. And I always looked at it as you would start out with the simplest tests and move forward, but evidently those guys don't figure that way. So at any rate, there are several projects that I'm involved in right now that all of you are going to find of great interest. And unfortunately, they're in the design stage, sort of, right now, but you'll be hearing about them, I would say, by this fall. And one of those which will be of great significance to all of you, is the TRACE database on a new website. It's under construction right now, and it's actually being set up as a totally interactive database. Will consist of, right now, a little over 2,400 cases of landings, near landings with physical residue. And you'll not only be able to pull up a summary of these 24,500 cases, but you will be able to then click on any of the cases and pull up the complete case, photos, sketches, analysis. Everything that I have on file will be on this site. And you also will be able to go in and ask, for example, how many 1-meter objects were seen in the 2,500, or what color, or how many little guys, or anything you want to ask. So this is going to be a tremendous tool. Unfortunately, there's a lot of data, and it's going to take a long time. There are 2 people working on the website, and I'm working full-time on getting the data formatted and acquiring the fill-in data for some of the cases with less information. So at this point, if everyone will just stop and consider how much of a tool this will be, not only for MUFON, but anyone interested in the subject. I have no idea at this point, but we'll be sure and let everybody know as soon as I know. And but what I need from you guys is, if you have any information on any physical trace case, if it's 1,000 years old, if it's yesterday, please don't just think, well, Ted probably has this, because he may not have it. And we need to make this thing as complete as possible. And the idea is not to steal anyone's case or information, but to centralize the data so we can make it available to everyone. So this is very important, and I would greatly appreciate hearing from anyone with sketches, photos, any kind of data relating to these cases. Now, before I get into the images, a kind of problem is coming along with crop circles. And that problem is that they are starting to be mixed with landing sites, UFO landing sites. And I'm not knocking crop circles, but this is entirely a different animal than what we're looking at in the trace cases. The crop circles, by and large, are much more intricate, they're much larger. And most importantly, there, to my knowledge, are no cases where a machine, a device, an object has been seen sitting there and then finding the site. So what I've done, I had about 5,000 trace events, possible trace events, and I have reduced that down by taking out all the crop circle reports and cases in which no object was seen generating the site. So this 2,400, 2,500 figure is made up of sites generated by observed objects. And if you're going to throw a document down in front of, say, some NASA folks, and you want them to take a serious look at it, it has to be a serious document. And they're not going to look at, well, maybe this was, maybe this is not. And however, the problem now is that so many people are confusing crop circles and UFO traces that I'm not getting some of the landing sites because people are now terming them crop circles. And the only cases I have no real interest in are these enormous productions where it looks like some of the Disney people have been in there with hedge clippers. But anything outside of that I am very interested in and I would very much like to receive so we can get it into this database. Now, we'll go to the images, and I think I have one of those implants in here this morning. Yes?
Are you asking for physical samples or just the info on it?
Physical samples we can work with now. the one stipulation is it has to be a pretty high quality case, because we don't want to have our chemists committing suicide because they're buried under all these samples. And so what we're talking about is a case where an object is seen at fairly close range, such as this one, and it leaves really unusual traces. You have credible witnesses. All you guys know what makes up a good quality case. And so no matter what quality the case is, I'd like to hear about it for the files, but the analysis will have to be a little more cautious with. Now, in looking at 24 or 500 cases, I'm finding that there are basically 4 types of objects that are seen generating traces. The type 1 objects are perhaps, to me anyway, the most fascinating of all, because they're very small. And this particular case is from France. This I received from the French project from Velasco, and this object was 1.5 meters in size. This is drawn to scale, if you can imagine. This would be a truly close encounter. And it was in daylight, and pretty hard to ignore this sort of thing. But the type 1 objects are very small, and they'll range from less than a meter to slightly over a meter in size. And let's see if I can work this. Yeah. This is another type 1 object. This was seen in Missouri in 1978. Was about a meter in diameter, and you'll see the trace from that coming up shortly. This was seen by 7 witnesses. It flew within 185 feet of them, and it was on the ground for 2 hours before ascending. A very similar object, 1 meter in size, that was seen in Missouri in 1999. It flew within about 35 feet of 3 witnesses in daylight and shut down a video monitoring unit I had running as it flew over it, dipped down in front of it, and made a really supreme left turn and fell in trail behind an automobile full of people. And this thing was only about 25 feet or so off the ground, so it was quite close. They had quite a good view of it. And but imagine this: 1 meter in diameter, no sound, no wings, no engines, no visible means of support. Kind of an interesting thing. The type 2 objects, this being Langenberg, Saskatchewan, 1974, 5 objects like this were seen hovering just above the ground, leaving behind 5 rings, all swirled in the same direction. The central portion of the material had been kind of sucked up where it was standing upright. The rest of the material compressed very tightly. And the type 2 objects in daylight basically look like this. They have a metallic appearance. They have a fat belt or protuberance band around the center. You might want to read this. What do I? Yeah. More info or? No. Yeah, there you go. Remind me later. All right. Technology, it is so great. All right, anyway, this is another type 2, the Trans-en-Provence object from France, about 2 to 2.4 meters in diameter, seen in daylight at close range, leaving behind a 2.4 meter diameter circle. And this is a point, when you get into these size objects, this is where it starts dropping off in the trace cases, and you'll see a graph. We don't have a lot of cases, surprisingly, involving the big guys. Now this is a sketch in the dirt of the Delphos object drawn at the time by Ron Johnson. Excellent super case. And yeah, there we go. This report is finally finished. I started investigating this in 1971. I finished the report the first part of this year. And the entire report in the files is, I don't know, 600-700 pages. And actually about 300, 350 of those are analysis from various labs. And anyone that wants, there's certainly not time to discuss that now, but anyone with any questions, catch me somewhere as I'm racing around out here, and I'll be happy to answer any analysis questions. But again, you see there that belt, that fat protuberance around the base, very, very similar to the Langenberg objects, and the size was almost precisely the same. The ring generated was the same size as in Langenberg 3 years later. This photograph of an object over Missouri, 3 witnesses, physical traces. It was 300 feet from the camera. And of course, what is very interesting is that tower-like structure, which appears to have an opening and a sort of antenna coming out. 2 photos were taken of the object, and in the type 3s, we get up to objects that are around 20 to 25 feet in size. And they leave entirely different types of traces. They typically don't leave the ring. They leave an area that is a circular pattern, but it's totally dehydrated or burnt or depressed. And in these types of cases, you find 3 or 4 landing pad imprints, such as this one, Sakuro. And an interesting thing is, one of the best cases in the books is Valençol, France. And that object was just identical to the Sakuro object. The witness was closer in France. He was 35 feet. This was at a distance of 180, 190 feet. And when the director of the French government project, I asked him, I said, they had thoroughly investigated the Valençol case, and I said, what do you think? What do you think about this? And he said, it's real, it happened, no question. And he said that the witness in France made the comment, that case was a year after this one, made the comment when they were showing him the sketch, he said, someone else has seen my object. And he didn't see the insignia, or whatever that is. But he did see 2 little guys, which were seen in Sakuro also. This is a Type 4 object. This is your typical flying saucer. The things are in excess of 6 meters in size. And this one was seen taking off from a roadway in South Africa, igniting the road surface and leaving quite a nice physical trace. This is a Type 1 sight. This was left by the little 1-meter object, slightly oval. It was dehydrated. There were 2 small craters down in this area here and here, where it looked as though there was some kind of vertical thrust, went into the ground, dug out a couple of little craters, kicked the dust up onto the bull nettle plants. The plants' leaves closed up, trapping the dust particles inside. And at the front part up here was a little swirled, kind of a miniature nest. And this thing again, now 7 people daylight, 2-hour observation, takes off, and it ascends silently, goes by them. It makes a turn to the right, which is across the wind, a sharp turn to the left across the wind. In other words, it was being powered by something. And it rendezvoused with a large cylindrical object, which was hovering at a higher altitude. They flew away. I acquired many, many samples of this material, and no analysis was ever done. Now this is the 2.4 millimeter ring at Trondheim province left by the daylight object. A lot of analysis has been done on this, and it's available through the French government in a very detailed report. And it's some fascinating stuff, and they come to some fascinating conclusions. This is the kind of stuff that we like to see, obviously, because to get science involved and come up with some interesting conclusions is quite a switch. Now this is a 2.4 meter ring in Delphos, Kansas, and was photographed by Sheriff Inlow 16 hours after the event. And what's really neat is we have a Polaroid photo of this ring taken minutes after the object left. The ring glowed for 4 evenings, according to the witnesses. And as you can see, the surface material is a very crisp white in color. And at the early onset, this effect went 14 inches into the ground. The soil was fairly rapidly, especially in color, returning to its normal condition. But what is really interesting, I wanted to throw this in. This is the ring 3 years and 6 months later. And what's really interesting to me is this little area right here. Which is this area right here. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, 5 rings have been found in Saskatchewan of the same horseshoe configuration and basically the same size. So I'd be interested to see what that turns up. But this was a simple farm family. And of course, what we have to do, if you have really unusual traces, we then have to discredit the witnesses. So a lot of that has been done. I knew these people long before money became an issue. And money became an issue because the National Enquirer approached them with money. Before that, and I had spent many hours with these people, there was no talk of selling samples or receiving money for anything. And even some of the UFO investigators at that time that were coming in were suggesting to the family that maybe they should charge admission, that maybe the big city guys were making money off of their odd sight. And of course the skeptics jump on that and they say, well, they did this for money. Well, the interesting thing is I've sent this photo and the 3 year, 6 month photo to many experts in fungal rings and other natural causes, even experts on lightning. And I simply said, I didn't mention UFOs. I said, have you ever seen anything like this in nature? And to a person, they all said, no. What is it? And so we, when all else fails, we come up with interesting explanations, such as this was created by a circular feeder that was placed out there. The animals would eat, they would become excited, and they would urinate. Well, there are a couple of pretty fatal flaws in this. Number one, there was never a circular feeder at this spot. For one reason, the animals were all contained in pens back in this area. Out here, you have an absolutely open shot into an enormous field. So any farmer with any brains is not going to let his sheep or pigs out to a circular feeder to eat, so then they could roam out into the field and he could spend 2 weeks chasing them down. So animals had not even been in this area, except occasionally a stray hog that would break loose or something. And I took the time and trouble, in contrast to skeptics, or I should say other investigators, who went into this site, didn't even talk to the boy or his mother, only talked to the father, the most vulnerable guy in the entire family to lead. And so that's not a very thorough investigation. Now, we're supposed to be held to objective standards, but it's okay for these guys to go in and talk to just one of 3 people involved and not even the primary. And so I took the time, and I'm quoting, being a somewhat thorough investigator but ready to accept witness testimony at face value, I talked to 2 vets who had handled livestock on this farm for many, many years. They had been through this area many times, and they said never did they see any structure of any kind in this area, and there was no reason for it to be there. And I even found a family photo in the family's album taken about 8 months before the object purportedly was there. And in the background, you can see this area quite clearly. There is nothing standing there. And the final killer to the excited animal idea is that Phyllis Buttinger did the recent analysis, and there was no indication of any abundance of uric acid or anything of the sort. So I think it's time to move on and perhaps consider that witnesses are telling the truth. Now, I'm going to run way over, so I'm going to have to run through this stuff. Sorry about that. I get a little heated on that particular case. That's the Delphos effect. Yeah, that's exactly right, Bob. And 29 years of my life, I'm telling you. But anyway, we find these configurations of imprints. They're interesting because you can do weight determinations, figure out in a ballpark figure what the object may have weighed. In most of the cases that I've seen where weights were calculated, the object leaving these sorts of imprints weighed about 18 to 20 tons. So that is a fairly significant device. It doesn't seem to be anything of a supernatural origin. The things do physically affect their immediate surroundings. Now, in the Type 4 objects, they're large, so what do you get? You get large sites. And this was up in Canada, and quite an interesting case because this area was dehydrated. It was just as though the plants had been zapped by some super powerful microwave oven. Now, I'll try to go through these as quickly as possible because I know what it's like to fall asleep in a dark room. And I don't want to put you guys through this, but in all these years of looking at this stuff, the current statistics are these. And again, I'll be extremely brief. The total distribution of the cases, and as you can see, when we get over into recent years, 1990, 1980, 1990 to 2000, the total number of cases has dropped dramatically. The period of 70 to 80 was extremely high. And I'm glad to see this because I wondered how we were so busy. Monthly distribution doesn't really show us a lot. There's no really distinct pattern in the distribution. For a long time, the month of October was very, very prominent as a peak, and that seems to be now changing. Now, this is interesting because here we have North American cases, monthly distribution, foreign cases, monthly, and a Russian study, monthly distributions. And there seem to be these same sort of peaking areas. For example, I did a study. I was just up in Canada. Before I went up, I looked at the Canadian stats, and their big months are August and September. And as I talked to these people, even about cattle mutilations, cat mutilations, and now we even have, I've got to tell you this, a mouse mutilation. Yeah, it was a sad thing to see, believe me. And some pretty intricate work, I'll tell you that. Okay, one of the most interesting statistical patterns is time distribution. And as you notice that increasing and that peaking at around 8, 9, 10 o'clock. And this is a pattern that holds no matter how you look at it. If you pull out just Brazilian cases, same pattern. Russian, same pattern. French, U.S., doesn't matter. Well, that's PM. Okay, again, if you divide out the North American versus the foreign, you see that same sort of peaking period. And what's really interesting that shows up in all but the Canadian cases is that nice little peak at 2 in the morning. So I should have seen a landing over the last couple of mornings. Yeah, just anywhere. Sighting duration, and this, you know, this stuff is important in that we're not looking at events as a lot of folks would like us to believe, where someone sees a light in the night sky at a very great distance for a couple of seconds. In the landing trace cases, as you see, between 1 and 10 minutes are actually the largest volume of cases. Well, in 1 to 10 minutes, you can pretty well determine if that's a Goodyear blimp setting 50 feet away on the ground. Significant distance to object. No, the objects are not seen far away. If you'll notice, between 1 and 5 meters, the greatest number. And if you'll look, between 0 and 15 meters, which is not a lot of distance, 45, 48 feet, you have the great abundance of reports. And I found this extremely interesting. The size of the UFOs reported in landings, very small. Look at that in the 2-meter range. And in the 0 to 1 meter, well, obviously they're not 0 or you wouldn't see them, but around 1 meter. But when you consider the percentage between a 6-meter object and 1 meter or less, it's astonishing. And as I say, I'm getting so interested in the smaller the object, the more interesting it is. The trace dimensions correlate with the size of the objects that create them. Pretty obvious pattern there. If the object is 1 meter in diameter, it's probably going to create a 1 meter sight, 2 meters, and so on. Now here I get into this, I was in a real, as you can see, a Spielberg mode, because I wanted to do a little high-tech stuff for you guys. And it's all right to laugh. It's I'm not that creative with computers. But at any rate, what is so interesting to me is I go through these cases. This is supposedly a standard size automobile, which, by the way, I would sell at a really good price if anybody needs one. It's like new, very low miles, only been levitated 4 times. It does have traces on it, as a matter of fact. And if you look at that red Jeep back there behind it, there are a lot of traces on that. But at any rate, this is simply a to-scale inserted image of a Type 1 object. Look how small this thing is compared to an automobile. I mean, we get in these things and ride around, and I'm not saying an object of this size is full of little guys, but then we go up to the Type 2 object. And occupants have been seen around these. But look how small this thing is compared to a car. And even when we go to the larger type objects, Valençol, Curl, so on, they are not that much larger than a standard automobile. And so I'm coming to a really goofy opinion that these things, as we understand transportation, physics, and everything else, these things are short range. And of course, the question is, what are they traveling in to get to that short range point? And or perhaps they're just not using the standard mode of transportation. For many years, I ignored things totally, like time manipulation. And then I started wondering if you have an object in a trace created in 1933, An identical object and trace generated in 1970, and in 1988 and 1998. There's no technological advancement that we can see from these people. So either they're very dumb and they don't advance with their equipment, or perhaps one answer, and it's interesting to me, is what if they were all leaving on the same day? Trace cases by daylight, by nighttime, by twilight. A lot of twilight, significant number of daylight. And the daylight cases are generally quite good. Okay, I'll give you time to read this again. Remind us later. And the three main types of site conditions, most interesting being the dehydrated sites, and of course they are the smaller numbers. But the effects are much more interesting than something that's simply depressed into the ground or burnt. The nice thing about the burnt cases is, contrary to popular belief, very simple analysis will identify accelerants. So you can eliminate all kinds of possibilities such as hoaxes, et cetera, et cetera. Site shape, obviously, circular wins out by quite a percentage. Now, this is another interesting thing. It surprised me. I got actually quite a number of surprises in this study, but the number of occupants seen per event. And the greatest percentage involves more than one occupant. In my mind, for some reason, and looking at a lot of cases, it seemed as though you would only find one occupant involved. And as it turns out, the little critters travel around in herds. Maybe that's why they're so interested in cattle. Okay, what this simply indicates is that people do not see humanoids, occupants, little guys, whatever, at great distance. Look at that in the 1 to 5 meter range. If you're standing from something daylight or dark 5 meters, within 5 meters of something, you can pretty well determine what you're looking at. It's not the neighbor's dog or anything like that. The object size from occupant cases, and I could go on and on for days with these statistics, because as you go through them, you see more and more paths that need to be taken. So I'm doing statistics on the EM cases and so on, pulled out of the trace events. So now we get to what I'm sure is much more interesting stuff. This is a photograph that I took at the Missouri site, which is still ongoing. It has really died down. There was a 41-day period in which nothing was seen in the spring, and currently we're in a so far 3-week period of no activity. But we have nearly 100 witnesses to a fabulous number of events, some of them involving traces. And at any rate, I shot this thing, it's a 2-second exposure on Fuji 800 film at an aperture of f8, because I wanted to try to get a little bit of sharpness, a little depth of field. And this is obviously 2 objects. And these are quite astonishing things to see. I have no idea, no earthly idea what they are. Interesting configuration. And this was especially interesting because there were 17 of us. And somebody called my attention to, hey, there's a light on the ground over there. And so in Spielberg style, I moved all my extensive equipment and took a 5-second shot of this. And this thing is in an area that is extremely difficult to access. And as a matter of fact, you would have a tough time even getting my Jeep in there. So it's pretty bad country. And no lights, no people, no anything, no reason for this thing to be there. And numerous witnesses have seen this thing in this area, and in some instances actually moving around above the trees in this area on a number of occasions. So I hope eventually to be in the area and get close to this thing sometime. Yeah, except it really moves around. It covers a lot of area. And as you can see, this thing's moving on. This is an 8-second exposure, and the trail goes on for some distance beyond that.
What area? What area?
Missouri. Yeah, I'm sorry, the witnesses, and there's been a lot of harangue about this, but the witnesses want no publicity. And if the location or their names ever get out, that'll be the end of it. And believe me, they will shoot you if you come over the fence. And so it's not Ted Phillips that's not giving out the location, it's the people telling him not to give it out. I wish I could stand up here and give you every single detail, and I can't. Eventually, I hope we will be able to. Close-up of the front section of this thing. Another interesting shot, and of course what this triggered was memories of Piedmont, Missouri. Harley Rutledge, never read his book because he wasn't a very friendly guy, and he told Heineck and I that he could pretty easily solve it all by himself, so I didn't buy his book when it came out. But anyway, well, I just got it. You know, that cutting your nose off, because I could have bought it for $5 just a few years ago, and now they're $150. Not because it's such a good book, but they only printed about 50 copies. So anyway, these things do some interesting stuff, and part of the ongoing project is I'm currently working with some folks that really know what's shaking, and we are putting together an instrument array that will give us a lot more information. It will measure a lot of parameters and give us some really good video data. And since whatever the things are decided to knock out my little home-built unit. Now to show you that it's not all business, this is an especially good shot of Bruce Maccabee there. I really like that. But we were all up in Canada last week. We were up there for several days and picked up some really good cases and did a couple of lectures each and so on. And this is Nancy Talbot, who does the crop circle research. Of course, Bruce Maccabee. Fern, who is the expert in Canada on cattle mutilations. And then this pathetic thing over on the end. One thing, when I see this picture, when I see this, I think of Fern made the statement at one of the lectures. And I can't believe this. It's a tiny little old town up in northern Canada. And they had a great crowd. Not as great as this one, but it was a great crowd. And I don't know where they came from because there was no people around there. And when it was time for the lectures, they just sort of fell out of the air and the place filled up. It was really odd. But at any rate, Fern got up and he did something that we rarely do. He warned people about going into crop circles and mutilated cows and so on. Well, the cows, you'd realize this, but that you should use gloves, try to protect yourself, because we don't know what we're dealing with. And every time I see myself in that photo, I think, yeah, 35 years of going unprotected into landing sites. What more can I say? You can be like me. But now here we are at work. Boy, we were out there. This is a tremendously interesting case, which unfortunately I can't go into, but this is one of the witnesses right here. Two brothers, they own like 10 billion acres of prime land up there. Very wealthy, they have a couple of businesses. They're not guys that need to sell this story to anyone. And in 1975, they were clearing this area of trees, And over on the right side of them, they see a 40-foot perfect circle of dehydrated, not burnt, not depressed, but dehydrated plants. And in the center of this, they find 3 imprints. And if I'm lucky, the imprints were arranged like this, and the configuration was like this. But what was very interesting, these things were a couple of inches into the ground. This is pretty hard ground. And the walls were shaved off cleanly in this curved configuration. But of greatest interest, at the front of each of the imprints was a material. And this material looked as though it had been actually shaved off the front portion of the landing pads as they went into the ground, and it was just kind of laid there. So they gather up the material. And again, this is 1975. So they had a friend at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They took a small sample to them. And about 2 days later, the RCMP called these fellows, and they said, hey, we don't have enough of a sample to analyze. We need all the material. Now imagine that. He said, we need all the material. These guys said, no, I don't think so. One of these guys was a physics and chemistry teacher, and he was realizing this is odd. So he has done over the years a number of experiments with this stuff, and I'm telling you, it is strange, strange stuff. And so they happened to catch my lecture in Canada, and they came up very quietly afterward, and they've never reported this other than the RCMP. And they said, we'd like you to come out and take a look at the area and get these samples analyzed. So Phyllis Buttinger is getting some new samples to start on. And for the first time, if she determines that we need more exotic tests, they shall be done. And so this, I hope we will be able to really come up with some answers. Maybe next time I talk to you, I can give you something. Now this is an interesting photo, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. It's on the UFO British Columbia site. And it's very interesting because the investigator was at one of the lectures, and he gave me, this is a direct copy of the original, and he gave me this image. It's a close-up of the back objects, and these things obviously were seen in daylight, and the witness, there were 2 witnesses, a gentleman and his wife, and they were in a boat. They see these things, and he snaps one photo. Now, you can look at this and see, you don't see something like this every day. And what I wanted to point out about this is that we're dealing with these small orbs, small spheres, small objects. And this is the guy that took the photo, and this was at Tagish Lake in the Yukon territories in 1970. And of course, immediately the guy was besieged by skeptics. Got to be a fake, all this. And this guy has never sold these pictures. He has not tried to make any money. And I just want to make just one very short point as I get out of here. 2 witnesses, he and his wife. This guy had 35 years of government service in Canada, chief of the Inspection Division of the Canadian Grain Commission. He represented Canada in several trips to Russia and China, described by, as a highly intelligent, analytical man of science, scientific bent and solid integrity. So what I'm pointing out here that this guy doesn't sound like a hoaxer. Well, maybe he does to some people, but the whole point is that he saw these things, he and his wife, he photographed them in daylight. We have the images, that's sort of physical evidence. And the guy had pretty good credentials, tremendous reputation in the community and so on. and yet he has been beaten into the ground by critics. So the whole point is, if you can't explain the case, then you destroy the witnesses. And frankly, I'm sick to death of seeing that. We've reached a point. The BBC called me several months ago, and they said, we understand you can provide witnesses to do on-camera interviews. And I said, no, I don't think so. I can't think of a single witness that would go on camera from any really good case. And the lady says, why? I don't understand. They would turn down an appearance on the BBC. And I said, yes, they would. And the reason is, you people, the media, have generated this situation where almost any witness to any good case now will request not to be identified, not to have the location released, simply because they don't want to be besieged by thousands of people trampling the ground, asking questions, and Dan Rather in the evening news coming in. And a good example, and this points up the whole problem, and this summarizes it. In Springfield, Missouri, 3 weeks ago, there was a TV news report on a number of witnesses in south central Missouri who had been seeing really odd things. And as they opened the newscast, across the screen comes, and the voiceover, are they UFOs or are they just crazy? And then these poor people come on, I imagine. And at the end of the interview, here it comes. Are they UFOs or are they just crazy? So we've got to deal with that. And what we've got to do, instead of berating and questioning witnesses, we have to question them. We have to deal with it as objectively as we can, but in the meantime, we've got to treat these people with respect and consider the fact that they are providing us information. And the real key is the people that don't want to be identified, that don't want to sell these reports, why make up a big lie and not tell anyone? So that's where we're at. But we are making progress. Hang in there and keep the faith, and I'll certainly try to keep you up on how these projects are going, and we'll appreciate any support as far as information and so on that I might be able to get. And as always, I enjoy it, and thank you very much, guys.